Next up, we have a panel on creatively changing climate perceptions through media, film, and the arts. And our moderator will be Michael Cain, founder and president of EARTHx Films and M3 Films, producing movies with a mission. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. She said I'm Michael Cain. I am the president of EARTHx Film. I'm also the partner in a company called M3 Films, which is making movies with a mission. And we work to help nonprofits, corporations to help tell their philanthropic story and to turn media into a tool to help get the messaging out. I'm joined by 3 panelists. I'm sort of having an oxygen thing going on today, so if I tune out, in fact, if I pass out, just rush up here and help me out. But on my left is Varushka Franceschi, who's the founder of Shapeshifter Dream Productions. She's producer on a film called The Crack in Everything. Would you like to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I became an accidental activist because I went into a community in Pennsylvania, and there was a lot of infighting in the communities between people who were pro-fracking and anti-fracking. And as a result of that, I actually put together a film, and it's starring James Cromwell. We're workshopping right now, and so we're in the process of making the film. A lot of it has been incredibly interesting for me because I didn't even know anything about fracking and how it impacts climate change. And in the past 4 years, I've learned a lot about the connection between the burning of not just methane, but also the environmental impact of the poisons. And I'm sure a lot of people are aware. They've probably seen some of the films, including Gasland 1 and Gasland 2. And actually, Josh Fox is a neighbor of mine. I really had to move up to that part of the world, and I've been there for the past 5 years, and really felt that a film was really important, a narrative film. There's been a lot of documentaries, really great documentaries, but I believe that a narrative film, as well as a series, which is what we're doing, can help people connect with real stories from the sacrifice zones, basically. There are communities that are fighting for their lives, basically, but there's both sides. Of course, you want to see the side of the industry, because I think a lot of people in the industry believe that they're doing something good, some people. And so we're taking a look at both sides, but I've put my heart into it because I've seen firsthand and experienced people's lives being deeply affected, including a couple of the people that I interviewed have passed away from very rare cancers. So I would say that it's a hard project. It's something that I feel very passionately about because of the people that I met. So I'm really thrilled to be here. And I think that the creative arts is one way to reach people's hearts, which I think is something that is lacking. I think we're a very intellectual culture. We use our heads a lot, and I think it's time to engage the heart through stories, and so that's pretty much it.
Thank you. We're also joined by Susan Israel. She's the president and founder of Climate Creatives.
Hello, everybody. I love hearing everybody's origin story. I feel like I'm at a revival meeting, and for a week we're going to be saying amen, amen, amen. And some people started their journey a really long time ago, and some, like myself.
Varushka,
thank you. More recently, I was an architect for 20 years, or over 20 years, and I kind of knew about the climate, and I've been listening and paying attention through the industry. Got my lead AP, and really wanted to make an impact. And then I read Hot, Flat, and Crowded in 2008 by Thomas Friedman, and I just said, that's it. This is nothing else is worth working on. And so I pivoted immediately. Tried to do a green practice for a few years. It was 2008. Hit upon the idea of using art, and and kept going because for the same reason that I feel like we need to connect to people emotionally. So that's and the other part of it is I have 3 children. They're in their 20s, and I don't know if they'll have children. I don't know if I want them to have children, and that's a really horrible feeling.
And Mark David, who's a film producer and a real estate developer, who's currently producing a film called Power that will actually be showing here this weekend.
Exactly. It's going to be shown at 2 o'clock on Saturday. So my origin story was through the making of this film, really. I started out with an interest in the subject matter, but really my passion grew as I started to develop this. And we filmed in 10 countries on 5 continents, really looking at what's happening around the world to meet our future energy needs. We looked at this from many different perspectives. We actually didn't deal much with climate change in name because we felt it was a polarizing issue, or that people had very strong opinions one side or the other. And I think people can very effectively change people's positions on this subject, as we saw from David Fenton earlier. But I think from our perspective, we were trying to give a sense of optimism, which I think was lacking in a lot of the documentaries that were being made at the time that I started developing this.
We had a discussion about this the other day, and so I'm going to go to my notes here, but we talked about the goal is to educate the general public about climate issues without overwhelming and depressing everyone into inaction. I think that's the same goal that we all hold, whether we're in media or the arts or literature. It's also about, showing a small amount of the problem, so then allowing us to be more focused toward the solutions, so that we engage the people beyond just the moment that they're actually watching the media or the art, but it's that next day effect, that 24 hours later, what is it that they want to do and how do we bring them back? Susan, you have a presentation. Would you run with that?
I just realized I don't have a clicker. Is there?
I think that you may have to tell them.
In the podium? I think I'm now attached to it. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't think of that.
Nice reaction time, everyone.
So we've had the introduction. So from architecture, I had been working on these, using art for climate change engagement, and eventually evolved into my own company, Climate Creatives. And engaging people to think about sustainability using art and design for the reasons that we were talking about. So I have a friend who's very cerebral, very analytical, and he keeps sending me this graphic and saying, look, this is really scary. This is really scary. Doesn't this motivate everybody? And then he has this other one, the carbon bubble. How many years do we have left before we use up our carbon budget and hit that 2 degrees? And although I think we've already used it up. And my feeling is that apparently does not work. We have a lot of data, and what we're finding right now is that people are actually taking the data that they hear and confirming their pre-existing viewpoint. It's not moving the dial in the way that you think it would. And then another problem is that people think, wow, this problem is huge. Really, what could I do? It's just, everything I do is so insignificant in the face of it, I'm not going to think about it. It's too expensive. Right? We hear that at all different levels. It's like, well, I can't afford to change my light bulbs. I can't afford to change the company. I can't afford to change the government. And then everybody just gives up. They just say, this is hopeless. There's nothing I can do about this. And that quickly leads to despair. And then total apathy. Like, well, I'm just going to go about my day and continue doing what I was doing before. And I'd like to move all of those internal dialogues in people's heads to, what can I do to help? So we've heard a lot of great solutions here, and the problem is you have to get people to do it. So I hope I'm not rearranging the deck chairs. I hope I'm telling people there's an iceberg out there and they need to pay attention. And the reason why I use the art and design is because it is such an overwhelming problem. People just shut down. It's ugly, it's frightening. If you really, really understand it, I'll watch some documentaries and I cannot get up off the floor, and I already know it. So how do you reach people without having them shut it down? How do you empower them? How do you give them enough information so that they they can take it in, as Michael said, and then act on it. And so I do it at different scales. I use art on the fine-grained scale with stakeholders in all kinds of organizations and in small groups, all size groups really, and empower people through what is kind of a very simplistic approach. They make a sculpture together and it has certain messages layered onto it. But I watch people do it, and they get really engaged, and they spend an hour and a half an hour, depending on the length of the workshop, talking about specific climate issues, renewable energy, whatever the agenda is of that organization. And at the end of it, they feel really great. So they've had this really positive experience while they're discussing the difficulties, and they're also creatively coming up with solutions. And everybody walks out of there feeling like they can do something. So the first thing is we have to empower people. We have to give them enough information, and we have to empower them. And that's from stakeholders up to decision makers. So at every level, you can use this technique. And then, of course, what we really need is broad-scale cultural change. We need to shift the culture from apathy or fear or ignorance to get people on board. And so trying to scale up, which is really has been a bootstrapped process here of testing things out, larger scale public workshops, and then starting to work on a larger scale. So translating data for people where they are. So bring the information to where people are in a way that connects to them viscerally. So talking about the local scale and the immediacy. And so this project is Rising Waters. These are some older versions of it, but it shows people where future flood levels will be. And as they walk by, they all say, oh, I get it. And there's this connection to their body. So while we need to scale things up digitally, and I am moving in that direction, but I think we also need to hold on to the analog, the real world, the touching people locally where they are. And I did this in Panama in February and have been showing photographs of the installations in this country to show people that these islands, you can see the lines there, that's where the water will be 2020, 2040, 2060. These islands, like the Marshalls and the Maldives, will be gone probably in less than 20 years because they'll be underwater. But I also am doing that in this country because there are plenty of people in this country who couldn't care less what happens on a tropical island someplace that they can't see it. And those pictures were at the UN for the Oceans Conference this month. And Earth Day, Texas. Shout out to Earth Day, Texas. And so trying to take everything and accelerate its impact is partly what I'm doing. This is just a one-on-one personal conversation about renewable energy. And missing is missing pet posters for endangered species. And then I'm working on a digital version, which is which can scale up on screens. And so get that data out, but also pair it with people's opportunities for action. And I have a STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math framework that introduces students to the concepts of renewable energy and brings artists and engineers together. And we've piloted that here, and Panama is about to pilot it for the Panama public school systems. So it's really just trying to reach everybody at every level.
Thank you. Mark, I believe you've got a trailer for yours. You want to set that up, or?
Sure, yeah, it's the trailer for Power, if you have that. But I'll just give a very brief introduction. So, as I mentioned, we filmed in 10 countries, and we were really trying to reach as broad an audience as possible, to your point. We were trying to reach people who are disengaged or disheartened through imagery, through stunning photography, but also through a narrative and giving people a way to engage with the subject matter who might otherwise not be engaged, and showing how it's relevant to them, also showing them that there are steps that they can take, and that trying to empower people, essentially. And we looked at it from the perspective of power being sort of three different meanings. The first being electrical or mechanical energy, and the fact that our lives depend on that, and that over 1 billion people have no access to this, and that it should really be a human right for everyone. And then transitioning into the idea of authority as another definition of power, and how our energy system has been determined traditionally, and why it is we continue to use certain infrastructure energy sources beyond their useful date. And the third is the idea of empowerment, and what we can do and what people are doing all over the world, be it locally and small scale or on a much larger scale, and even politically and geopolitically. So and again, we didn't want to make a political film. We really wanted to make a much more just film that people could relate to, and hopefully we've done a little bit of that. So if we could.
Energy is a political tool. It's a real weapon.
The government is not good at implementing large-scale projects. They end up off budget. There's a lot of corruption. So.
The need for foreign oil has often forced American administrations to overlook abuses of power and human rights violations in exchange for a secure and cheap oil supply.
The leaders of these countries are very, very vulnerable to big corporations. And there's a long history of this exploitation that goes on. What I'm talking about is presidents who were either assassinated or overthrown because they didn't play the game.
It's much harder in Washington to change something than to stop something. There are moneyed interests on every side of the issue. So as a consequence, nothing really changes.
There are currently 7.4 billion people on this planet. 1.3 billion still don't have electricity.
That's the moral challenge for us and for our generation. First thing we do is make sure that every person on the planet has enough energy to get their basic needs met. We need to do that in a way that doesn't screw the planet up for them for the rest of their lives as well.
The situation that we are operating is very rough. We just pray to God that He gives us light by sun.
You and me definitely cannot even sit 5 minutes in front of a kerosene lamp and study. And that's how many of these kids actually study for 3 to 4 hours.
In India alone, every year 500,000 women and children are killed only because of indoor air pollution.
We need to move away from an economy that's based on militarization and creates a lot of pollution to economies that help starving people around the world.
More energy from the sun hits the Earth in 1 hour than all the energy consumed on our planet in an entire year.
There's a lot of opportunity for sustainable energy, and it's going to come from a bottom up.
You can do something if you believe it and if there's a just cause.
We have to change our behavior.
Energy is life. So everybody has a right to energy. Everybody has a right to energy.
That's fantastic, yeah.
Thank you.
And that shows this Saturday at 2 o'clock?
That shows this Saturday. We're showing a 35-minute version because we're still in post-production on the feature version, which is 90 minutes. And we're also in discussions right now to turn it into a TV show, which would be interesting.
Fantastic, yeah. That, I feel so much, media and art and literature obviously have the ability to move the needle in a different way because, as you were saying, it touches not only the mind, but it touches the heart. And I hear this over and over. I was just at Telluride Mountain Film for the festival, which is an excellent festival if you haven't been, but there's this talk of you protect what you love. And so to make people fall in love with nature and the outdoors, and that's a first step of beginning to understand that a change needs to take place. Years ago when Trammell Crow founded EARTHday Dallas, which has now grown into EARTHx, Texas, and now to EARTHx. How many have attended any of those variations of that? How many of you have a marble on you right now? I'm just kidding. So that's okay. Then you haven't met Trammell otherwise. But he'll be speaking later at 1 o'clock. But we really understood the fact that it was important to embrace people, not just with the exhibition component, obviously a strong conference component, but also the interactive pieces that took people's attention, and it brought the younger crowds in also, because we're always looking to how do we bring in the next generation, and how do we make the next generation be those allies. Because the first time I was taught about recycling and I was taught about turning the water off was my 6-year-old niece, who berated me for not knowing those things. And so it was a big opportunity that we feel that with EARTHx that we have the ability to take advantage of. I wanted to show you a little 2-minute piece to show you what we accomplished this last year. Sorry, that EDTX Sizzle, I believe. So we had an attendance of 115,000 people this year. We had 900 organizations that were involved and almost 300 speakers. We added 15 new initiatives because our attendance went up the year before, and so Trammell is always like bigger is better. So we brought in an eCapital Summit where there were organizations, family offices coming in to look at clean tech ideas for investment, and EARTHx with 1,200 hackers who came in to solve environmental problems over 36 hours. And one of my favorite initiatives, we added EARTHx Film, which is the new film festival. And we set it with the mission of showcasing films and emerging media that explore conservation, climate change, and the environment while honoring the heroes working to protect those. One of my favorite features of it, we did a youth competition and we had 35 entries come in from ages 12 to 21 with 30 to 60-second short films on the environment. And they became the next generation of environmental filmmakers. And so it was for us that ability to use media and to take it to the people, because that's one of the things we've been discussing is how do you get content in front of people? Because on one hand, you can have an event like this, you can invite everybody, everybody travels here, it's a beautiful place. You know, in many ways, we are the choir, and we will go where, you know, each other are, but how do we get that general public to open their minds and hearts? And, you know, we opened the event this year with Chasing Coral. How many of you have seen Chasing Coral? It's a brilliant film. It's playing this weekend also. There's a great impact film lineup that Chip and his team have put together. But years ago, a great meeting for us, Chip brought in Luis Sejoyas and introduced us to a film called Racing Extinction. And that film, we ended up participating in it and helping it with some finishing funds. And that movie introduced the idea, once again, that you took the media to the people. And I know they were in 200 countries simultaneously on the same day with Discovery Channel. But not all media works that way, and not all messaging works that way. We actually got involved with another project. Part of this, I think the interest was because Racing Extinction went so well, and a film called Bigger Than Water that we've now are participating in. And I show it because it's an example of kind of where our heart is, and the same way that I think all of us are always looking for partners. We're looking for people to get involved at various forms, whether it's financially or whether it's helping get the word out or being impact partners with it. So I wanted to show you a very long trailer for Bigger Than Water.
First of all, if somebody had told me 3 years ago you were going to be drinking out of the Flint River, I'd have called them an abject liar. There is nobody in this city that wasn't told by the age of 3 or 4, you don't get in it, you don't go near it, you don't eat anything out of it. That is poison.
Governor Snyder, I'm glad you're taking action now, but it's a little bit late for the kids in Flint whose health has been compromised, for people whose immunity systems were already compromised, for a city in America that is on its knees because of a failure of a philosophy of governance you advocated.
Emergency management within itself is what I call a shapeshifter, because from community to community, it looks different. It attacks different. But in terms of the end result, the harm is still the same.
It's very plain, it's very simple. The love of money is the root of all evil.
Early, do you agree that as emergency manager you had broad powers?
Yes, sir.
And you used those broad powers to cut about $18 million from the budget by moving away from the Detroit water to the Flint River. And this was the agenda from Governor Snyder's office to save money. That was the emergency referred to in emergency manager. In fact, in your testimony, you said a proposal to stay on Detroit water was, quote, an unsustainable financial fantasy.
That is correct, sir.
Flint is the largest customer to DWSD. So by being able to convince Flint that in order to get from out under emergency management, what we're going to offer you is the opportunity to create your own system. And therefore you can save money, you can bypass DWSD, who has been gouging you all of these years. That's the narrative they created. And so what people did is said, oh, of course we want to save money. And of course we want to get from under emergency management. Tell us how to do that.
It's not that you should never use river water for drinking water. Plenty of places do. You just have to do this one thing. You just have to do it safely. You have to treat the water first so it doesn't corrode the pipes.
Look at this. The smell from the water was just, it smelled like sewer.
Turn on the water.
I went to tell my son to go get in the shower, and he said, Mama, I don't want to get in that water because it's itching me. And one day he got out the shower and he just had this red mark on his back.
the big boys. General Motors was able to switch back to Detroit months before the residents got switched back. And we were saying, if it's corroding them engine parts, what is it doing to our bodies? We thought our bodies was more delicate, but we couldn't get them to switch back.
We discounted our reality for a long time. We discounted the fact that we were being poisoned. We just did not believe in America that that was happening.
We don't. Our kids don't matter. Nobody in this city mattered.
We felt very betrayed by a government that told us to drink the water. All we had to do was boil it, so we did. Only months later to say, when you boil water, you intensify the lead. Then they gave us filters that the governor passed out. That's the governor of the United States of America. We trusted that system, only to find out that the systems they gave out were not even filters that filtered out lead. Then they walked around, state police, lights flashing, and they gave us filters and said, these are the filters, so we drank the water again.
Once the problems started happening, some remained quiet and some said publicly the water was safe, the water was safe.
Anyone who is concerned about lead in the drinking water in Flint can relax. All of our tests have been comparable with what we used to get out of Detroit.
You look at how much energy they put in lying. It would have been 1,000 times easier to do their goddamn job.
All of us are experiencing some kind of symptoms. I know I'm having memory lapse. Some of my members have lost their hearing, a lot of rash, a lot of irritability.
I ended up seeing behavior changes in my son. He was suspended 56, 57 times. My daughter started getting aggressive, started wanting to fight me. This is what killed my unborn twins.
My husband is a walking heart attack. My daughter, at 16, has liver failure. My other daughter, lead poison. I am lead poison. And congratulations, your mistake even killed the family dog.
I get shortness of breath, I get weak, I get dizzy.
My daughter broke out real bad over her face.
People are bringing in bottles of hair, we're bringing in jugs of brown water, we're showing our rashes. We have all this physical evidence, nobody's listening to us. And so that's when I decided I was gonna get to the science, because you can't argue with science.
I think I got all the names. We had to inform and learn on our own, and we had to teach each other, while our government hid it.
We only have Spanish, guys.
Here, I have a ton.
Our people don't have a clue what's going on. Nothing was translated from the government nor the city or the health department. So that was an explanation I had to do.
We were not declared a disaster zone because this is a man-made disaster. So as a community, we're going out there, we're doing the state's job for them.
These women have been catapulted into a position of leadership that we will not even have the capacity to be grateful for generations.
As we're all fighting, we're all sick. So all these actions, get people on buses and taking them to Washington, D.C., taking them to our state capitol in Lansing. Every time it's somebody going away in an ambulance.
You are literally in a fight for your life right now.
I'm paying for it. With me and my children's lives, I feel like I'm paying for it.
You was a little ignorant and you just as ignorant as the rest of them.
Scientifically, it wasn't just smoke here, there was fire here.
Thank you. Ramin Ottoman's the director of that. We just actually submitted a cut to Toronto this last week, so we'll look forward to maybe being invited to the Impact Film Festival next year, Chip. Thank you. Okay. So my question, what next? What help do you need? How can we assist you in moving the agenda forward?
Well, in my case, we are still raising funds to be able to complete the film. The way that we've been raising funds so far is actually crowdfunding. We didn't necessarily start out with James Cromwell. We just recently had him come on board, and I have to tell you that when you talk about climate heroes, he's a hero of mine. He's someone who has basically put his body on the line. There's a fracked gas power plant that's going up near his community, and he lives in a beautiful area of New York, upstate New York, near Middletown. And so he actually got arrested as part of the way we on to 6. And there was a trial, and they argued the necessity defense. And we're actually putting that into the script because we're changing it around a little bit to include like what's happening currently. It could have been a landmark case in that if the judge had agreed with, I don't know if you're familiar with what the necessity defense is about, but it's basically that whatever crime that you've been accused of is much less than what is at stake, which is our survival as a species, and also the survival of every other species. So he basically put his life and his body on the line for this. And he's willing to go to jail for 10 days because they just said that they found them guilty, the way we on to 6th. So they didn't accept the necessity defense. But if he's not going to do the community service because he says that it's going to be basically the admission of guilt. And they believe so strongly, as do a lot of other people, that you have to do whatever it takes to stop what's happening to, when I say stop, I mean mitigate what's happening with climate change. And I think that if we don't do things like this, how can we change things? People don't realize that it's up to every one of us. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this. So with him on board, it's sort of become a bigger project. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking for more funding. So in any way, if anybody knows of any way to help us fund the rest of the project, we'd be so grateful.
Thank you. Susan?
Well, surprise, surprise, public art isn't the most lucrative thing to do. I've been self-funding the project up to this point, and I'm really at the cliff's edge. So yes, funding. And I have multiple projects that are sort of in planning stages. So one for air quality, extinction and biodiversity, civil engagement, and one that's even based on EPA photographs of before the EPA existed, an AR viewer that allows people to see what will happen if we let go of that progress. And all of these are things which will scale and reach many, many, many more people and require much more money to produce. The other thing is relationships, partnerships. I reached about 300,000 people with some of this smaller stuff by working through about 80 different organizations. And so I love partnerships, collaborations, any way that what I do can help your mission is what I'm looking for, because I see myself as an accelerant. I'm trying to get people to care enough to go in and see these fabulous films, because you have to get them in the seats. So I'm like the pre-stage that gets people thinking this is enough, this is important enough for my time and my interest, and puts that little emotional chirp in their ear that gets them going. So any kind of relationships are how I work.
Thank you.
So I hate to be repetitive. Similar issue.
Funding, would it?
Exactly. But no, actually, so we're in post-production right now. We need a little bit of funding to finish that, although we're pretty close. And we're in discussion with a few distributors about helping us to complete that. I think, so that is one thing we are looking at, especially from the marketing point of view and the outreach point of view. And so it's both the question of funding, but also like you, partnership organizations that we can say that this can live on beyond the hour and a half that you watch the film and drive people to organizations that share a mission with us. So.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical piece to it, is once the film is finished or once the media is finished, that's the beginning of its real life. I mean, and it's such a journey. They say the average film takes 7 years to make, and I would believe that on average. There's some that take longer and some that take less, but by the time it gets to the point where you're ready to get the message out to the people, that's the time when the filmmakers or the makers of the art or media need the most assistance. And I think these strategic partnerships the ability to help get the message out to the right people is such a critical component to it. I know we showed 60 films and shorts at EARTHx Film this year, and we had strategic partners based on the nonprofits, including AREI, that were there that helped us drive a crowd toward attendance. And then the next piece of it was, how do you turn awareness into impact? You know, how do you take it to that next step? And I know social media obviously is a big piece of that. I know crowdfunding and crowdsourcing are also pieces of that. I mean, are you also looking at other distribution means like VR or 360 or other ways to get the message out?
Yeah, and I actually think that it does intersect because we've changed so much. I mean, even film has changed so much with like the way that it gets distributed because, for example, what's going on with Netflix. Netflix at Sundance, Netflix and Amazon have been the biggest buyers of the film. So things are really kind of intersecting, and also the whole internet TV thing. So I think that it's really important to kind of think about that. Think about like how do we, because when you talk about, you mentioned younger people. Well, younger people live on their devices, so you have to think how are you reaching these people, these kids, and the millennials. So I think that it's really a wonderful thing to combine all of the mediums, art, music, everything together, and I think we can do that, and that's what strategic partnerships are about too.
And I've watched they talk about that millennials and younger people basically spend about a second making a decision as to what media they're going to watch. So when they're going through Netflix, they're literally like, that okay, go. So it becomes about an image almost, more so than it becomes about the messaging. And so many times, although there's multiples of the billions a day in content that they're watching 1 minute at a time. So it changes the way that you have to think about how you put it out. Like your 2-minute trailer, was that 2 minutes? Yeah. I mean, it's a complete story, but what a great hook to get them to want to watch the whole piece.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that we're sort of, I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, and I've loved the journey and learning about this, but I really want to try and be a channel for everyone here to at least help. I mean, there's only so much I can do, but to try and get the message out to a much broader audience who wouldn't otherwise be reached. And so any way that I can help, I would love to.
I think actually this is a time where all of us can come together, in different ways, because we're kind of, up against it. We're up against basically a wall. And so it's sort of a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us, for all humans right now, but especially those of us that work in the arts and even in science too, to figure out a way that we can work together to help each other, even find a way to fund some of these projects. Maybe there's creative ways that we can find this way to help all of us.
And that's what brings this group from preaching to the converted to an acceleration is how we find each other here and collaborate and support each other's projects. And it's very mutual. It's not just we need your funding, but we need your messages, we need your networks. We can bring a vehicle to your networks that will get the message across in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see it tonight on the schedule, but Age of Consequences that's playing this evening, if you haven't seen it, is an excellent movie. It's really fantastic. And to get in the military's take on what's happening with climate change, it's just fascinating. It's really well done. But I'd say all of the film programming that's coming up, and I know you've got Luis Sahoyas coming in, and you have James Bunbridge and Steve Michelson, and there'll be a lot more conversation about the role of media and the way that media, I hope, can help get your message out also. We ask at EARTHx Film if people have content that they'd like for us to showcase during our event, to send it our way. And we made that ask last year, and about a week out, maybe 2 weeks out, suddenly people were like, wait, I have something. But we're like, give us that chance to showcase what you do. And when you have the power of 115,000 people, and we can get them in front of screens, hopefully they connect to your messaging and you know, all of the projects that we're working on. We've got all of a minute now, if anybody has any questions.
I was curious, in your mention of population, you took a discrete fact of what population was at a given point in time. You know, in my lifetime, population has tripled.
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting that in addition to providing the discrete fact of population being almost 5 billion, that when I was born it was 2.5 billion, and providing a relationship is really quite stunning.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, thank you. That's a good point.
Anyone? Yes?
Yeah, so thank you for your panel. I'm definitely into action media myself, and being able to capture that person, not within 24 hours, but capture them within those 10 to 15 seconds of when they're pissed off, quite frankly, pissed off enough to actually want to do something about it. I've had to separate myself because of my position for the city from my media tools, but they're $2,000 a month worth of tools where in 10 seconds you could send an automatic Facebook post, email, tweet, and phone call on a specific issue and then let them know how they voted. If y'all want to use that for any of your films, you know, even attach them to your trailers, it's proven very, very impactful working on a very local level. And so it's not really a question, it's more just a strategic partnership opportunity.
What's that software?
It's called Phone to Action.
And we didn't have time to get into it today, but I actually had wanted to talk about Chasing Coral. They're a great example of what they're doing to work the impact. And there's something they did in Ohio where they screened the film 90 times within a community, empowering the community to then basically make it so that the local congressman could admit that he believed in climate change. And I think that there was an interesting case study, and they're about to do the same thing or something similar in Florida, which is fascinating. But there's so much topics there, but like I said, it's all about taking it to that next generation once you've finished the project. So I just want to thank you all so much for being here today. If they give them a round of applause. And thank you to the AREDAY team.